me as I listened to you is you actually presented arguments for both agreement and disagreement with the issues at hand. I thought you did that very, very well. I was also impressed with the way you enumerated the precedents that you felt were established by the ratification convention process. Something else that I was very pleased with was your recognition of the fact that small states like Delaware were very concerned about having equal representation somewhere in the new Congress that had been proposed. And those 30 deputies that were in Delaware who eagerly ratified the Constitution did so, and that 2 of those members, Richard Bassett and Cunningham, Virginia, had actually been in Philadelphia during the different debates. I was also impressed with your discussion about the pseudonyms, not only identifying the names that were used, but explaining who they were. I thought that was very impressive.
Yeah, no, this was great. I learned your history of the talking about how the ratification was not a landmark, or not the first time this had happened, and talking about the 1649 Manifesto, and then the Massachusetts, and the one other that I'm forgetting right now. But yes, thank you. Were excellent. I don't think we've heard Kenya yet in reference to the precedent set. We've heard a number of today, but not Kenya. Great factoid about the Elliot, about the Under Siege, about you know, that's a heck of a marketing campaign. There's no question about it. But it was not only an interesting anecdote, but it made your point, which is what was so. I mean, it was exactly right. You used it exactly right, and so that's really. It's one thing to tell a good story, but it's another to tell a good story and make a point. You got the amendment questions. The 21st was, and also Lane, as Professor Kaminsky will elaborate on, I think a little more when he talks, that your explanation as to why the use of pseudonyms was necessary, to not only through this sort of high-flying stuff about so we can just assess ideas on their merits, but that these people were actually in fear for their safety, I think is an important point, and it's one that Professor Kaminsky often makes. So anyway, this was pretty impressive, guys. You should be very proud of yourself.
I was very pleased with your opening statement. I'd like to reference to Robert Ruckman. Nobody ever cites him, a good friend of mine. He's been deceased for a while, but he was the editor of the Madison papers for many, many years, and wrote a couple wonderful books on the ratification of the Constitution and the drafting and adoption of the Bill of Rights, which I'm pleased that you read. They're important in the historiography of the Constitution. You mentioned the 3 constitutions, English in 1649, and then New Jersey and then Massachusetts. I was amused when he said the New Jersey Constitution gave the right to vote to women. They gave nothing. What they did was they made a mistake. They didn't put down free men, they put down inhabitants. And women took the opportunity. And to vote by property, they voted. Well, the men, they understood their mistake and they revised it later on, and they substituted the word free men for inhabitant. So it wasn't a gift. It was a mistake, and the women took advantage of it. Abigail Adams said, "I wish we had the same mistake in Massachusetts." But they didn't. Rousseau. You mentioned Rousseau, and you mentioned Rousseau had nothing to do with ratification, nothing to do with social contract. Well, I'm so glad to hear that, because in correcting the ratification of the Constitution project that has been going on now for almost 60 years, I'm the 3rd director, we have gathered together 70,000 documents, copies of documents. And of those 70,000 copies of documents, 1 refers to Rousseau. So Rousseau was not really part of this process, and you saying it, virtually nobody talks about him, but saying that he wasn't part of the process is a good thing, and you did that. You were right on the adoption of amendments, right on. state legislatures, except for one time. You were a little confused on the Confederation Congress. You were sort of vacillating between that and the going into the state conventions, mixing the two up there. The important thing in the Confederation Congress was Federalists wanted a bandwagon. They didn't want to show any opposition whatsoever, and they're meeting in secret in Congress. And so when you get a Bill of Rights proposed in Congress by Richard Henry Lee and other amendments, Federalists don't like that, even though they can brush them aside, and they've got a vast majority in Congress, but they want unanimity. And so what they do is they say, okay, let's get rid of all the opposition, get rid of that Bill of Rights from the journal, and we won't press for approbation. We'll just send it out without approbation or dissent. And what they do, they're remarkable politicians. We always have to remember that. They're not just theoreticians, they're great, great politicians, Federalists in particular. And what they do, the resolution starts out, the Congress unanimously sends the Constitution to the states. Washington, when he heard about this from Madison, he said, well, approbation would have been better. But if we can't get approbation with unanimity, let's take unanimity, because most of the people don't have the opportunity to peek behind the curtain to see what really took place. And so that was the reason why they just sent it forward without approbation. Let me see. I like your handling of the slave provisions. You could have gone a little more detail in that. George Washington, you hit 2 points with Washington. Symbolic was one, absolutely, and the other, he would be the first president. Who would have been the first president without Washington? I mean, who would you name that would unite the country? Nobody. And the fact of the matter is, Thomas Jefferson and 2 anti-Federalist writers said George Washington is the most dangerous man in America in 1787. What did they mean by that? They meant by that the Constitutional Convention knew that George Washington would never violate a trust given to him. Consequently, they gave tremendous powers and undefined powers, they implied powers to the president, knowing that Washington could be trusted. But what happens after President Washington? What happens, they say, under President Slushington? That's the problem. And so Washington does play a critical role. Pseudonyms, you mentioned a lot of good things about pseudonyms. Anonymity is important. 3 places in the country, the printers say we won't publish anything unless you leave us your name, anti-Federalists is pointing to be divulged to anybody who wants to know. Anti-Federalists are fearful of this. Remember, at this time, we have not only dirty politics, nasty politics, and mudslinging, we've got duels and caning going on. And so you want your anonymity. But sometimes you don't want anonymity, you want credit. And so sometimes people use the anti-Federalist pseudonyms that have become synonymous with them. So Tom Paine never signs Tom Paine. He always signs Common Sense because everybody knows Common Sense is Tom Paine. And he wants to be given credit for what he's writing for. Sometimes they get attacked for doing that. And finally, on the George Washington, the Georgia thing, you were partly right there, Elliot, and George Washington would agree with you. He said in a letter that a state with Indians on one side and Spanish on the other side would be crazy not to ratify the Constitution. But they also knew those Georgians were land hungry. And what they wanted was to take land away from the Indians, and they wanted always federal support. Ammunition, give us the ammunition, the arms, and we'll go fight them. But if they could get into this powerful central government, that would help them even more. And Georgia wasn't tiny, remember. Georgia's the biggest state east of the Mississippi today, and at that time, it went all the way to the Mississippi. So it was a gigantic state with a small population and wanting to fight the Indians, so they needed support from the central government. You did an excellent job.
Thank you.